Thank you so much. Hello, Helsinki. When I was told by Timu and Opi backstage that we have an international film star coming before me, I said I should just quit now. No one's going to pay attention to geopolitics after having someone like this out, but I hope I'll have your attention for the next 40 minutes. Now, we're here to talk about geopolitics. I think this word is probably the most contentious and the most important word that business leaders have had to face in at least the last 3 years. And for good reason, too. We have, to your Western neighbor, a country involved in a special military operation with one of your regional neighbors. We have issues in the Middle East that will impact global trade and finance for at least the next 5 years. And we have situations growing in other parts of the world which we're not even aware will impact your businesses yet. And I have something in my pocket which represents, I think, what innovation is possible when we come together, and also what innovation is at stake when global leaders diverge. Would you like to see what it is? It's a small thing. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it before. It's this. Zoom in if you can see it. This microchip semiconductor has been the most advanced kind of engineering that human beings have created. It has allowed us, as you all well know, to make Telia as a company possible, our communications possible. But what it has also done is showcase what's at stake when international global geopolitical powers fight for not natural resources, but man-created resources. And for an industry involved in telecommunications, it's more important than ever. So in the time that I have with you today, what I really want to do is not talk about what's happening in terms of geopolitics. I think that's easy enough to see. You don't need me here to tell you the dangers around the world. You can easily open up your phone and read it and see it. But answering this question, how to understand the changing world order, is, I think, a much more important question, and a question that if we get it right, it sets you up to truly understand what the future holds and how best you should interact with other business partners and other global government leaders into the future. Because what I've noticed working in geopolitics in the industry, leading Pareto Economics for the last 7 years, is that both investors, corporations, and governments have very short-term time cycles when making decisions. And with these short-term time cycles comes decision-making, which is very sporadic, because the long game is sacrificed for short-term gains or losses, depending on what we see around the world. But that's not a good way to conduct business, in my point of view. So where we start from is understanding the world through what's known as, rather, a first principles approach. So we're going to get straight into it, how to think about world affairs. Instead of being reactionary in your understanding of geopolitics, what you must do is take a much more systemic view of how geopolitics is going to impact the world. And that starts from first principles, a concept very well known in physics circles, but when it relates to world affairs, it's less easily applicable. But we've created a model of how to understand world affairs that I want to share with you today over the next 36 minutes to make it useful to you. And once I share this, what I'm then going to do is apply it to understand what will emerge from this understanding, and then use 2 case studies, one of China and one of Russia, to apply our learnings and our thinkings to what I've discussed in the past. And hopefully by the end of this talk, what you will have in your pockets and in your mind is a much more systemic way of thinking about world affairs, so that you can make more long-term investing and, for the policy leaders here, policy-making decisions, okay? So the first place we start is trying to understand what are the first principles of world affairs. Where do we start from? How do you apply this? So we start with the following understanding, and that's number 1. The nation state is the most powerful actor in world affairs today. There's not an entity that we have created as human beings which supersedes the power of the country, okay? And this can be proven. Well, number 1, wars happen between countries. People are citizens of countries. Tariffs are placed at the border of countries. Laws are created by countries. And new industries are allowed to emerge or die by the stroke of a legislative pen. So that's our first understanding, starting from a nation-state point of view. Then we have to ask ourselves, what do countries want? What's their MO? What's their modus operandi? And in our estimation, what countries want is power. I think we can all agree to that. But what becomes a bit more difficult afterwards is defining what is power. How do you define power in the state of affairs we have today? And this question has been answered by many academics and practitioners over the years, but I find them insufficient in our understanding of business today. The way in which we define power, the way we define power, is not the ability of one country forcing another country to do what it wants. That's more a result of power. But rather, power is the ability of a country to secure their own interests. I'll say it again. It's the ability of a country to secure their own interests. And that's not a yes or no answer. It's on a continuum. Some countries are more able, and some countries are less able to secure their own interests. And it's this dichotomy, and it's this sort of spread that we measure. And it's this spread that you need to know and to be able to forecast in your works into the future. So, okay, we understand that a country is a primary actor. They want power. That's how you define power. So the next step is answering, what does a country have at their disposal which allows them to secure their own interests? How can they control their own interests, essentially? Just like corporations, you have your ways in which you can secure yours. But countries, I think, have much more vital ways in which they can do theirs and ways in which impact business wholesale across the world. So this is what we have used to define this. Our centers of power model essentially allows you to understand how countries secure their own interests. Now, this is what you need to really pay attention to. If nothing else, this. So what we are saying is that a country has 6 different ways that they have at each country in the world, that they have at their disposal, which they can use to secure their own interests. And they're the following. Number 1, they can activate their consumer markets. Number 2, strength over their military balance. Number 3, and probably most importantly to the ones in this room, their technological leadership in different industries and how well or how badly they do this. 4, their systemically important commodities, how much they produce and how much they consume, and more so to do with that. 5, their geostrategic positioning, something which is very relevant in terms of Finland's position today, joining NATO recently, and knowing the security risks and the benefits around that. And number 6, their financial strength. These 6 different areas is holistically what countries have at their disposal, no matter if you're Botswana, if you're Albania, if you're Finland, or if you're the United States, or if you're China. Naturally, when a country becomes independent, as did South Sudan, they automatically assumed ownership of these 6 different things by their natures. So the way in which we create this is what's relevant also. So what we do is we combine these 6 and we create something called the Global Power Index, which essentially uses these 6 different, what we call centers of power, to create the holistic index called the Global Power Index. And what this also does is that with each of these 6, we have also created 6 indices based off of these, and we've essentially mapped the whole world against it. 194 countries have been ranked. We do this every year. We have 10 years worth of data, and we can much more accurately forecast where a country like Finland is going across all of these 6 different metrics, and also with the Global Power Index, and help inform businesses as to where the trajectory of Finland is going. And we'll be touching on Finland in terms of these 6, also future on in my presentation. So let's do this. Let's break this down like this. So we have the Global Power Index on the top, and we have the 6 sub-indices at the bottom. To create these, what we do is we essentially assign different themes to that index. What are the specific themes that we can cluster to create these indices? And within these themes, we have variables that go into these themes. So it's a very fractal kind of index. So for you business owners here and for you leadership in leadership positions, what you can do is triangulate any of these 6 different indices to Finland, to Russia, to the UK, to Sweden, to Switzerland, to wherever you want, to see how these countries are developing. And you can slowly see how a much more accurate view of the world emerges when you have this approach. And we essentially divide the world into 7 different regions when we're looking at this. We start with North America. We have South America, of course, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, Europe, and we also have Central Asia and Asia Pacific. Now, what I'm about to show you now is how the world ranks, at least the top 20 countries, how they rank in the world for 2023. Would you like to see it? Would you like to see it? Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is the world according to our index. Again, you're looking at the GPI, the Global Power Index, which essentially fuses all 6 of the sub-indices into that one index. So if there's debates, if there's discussions, why is this here, why is that there, keep in mind, we're not measuring power in the way that you used to imagine it, but we're measuring a country's ability to secure their own interests. That's what we're measuring, okay? We're not measuring power in that sense, we're measuring the ability to secure your own interests. So, in 3, 2, take a look. What do you see? Anything pop up? And for those of you who are keen, you can see Finland's here. Now, the scores are behind a screen because we'll be releasing the scores in our own event in March, where we'll be showcasing all of the scores and rankings. But in this case, to keep you entertained and to keep you interested, if you're interested, we can talk later about the scores. But this is how the world looks like in 2023/2024. Let's examine this index for a second. Again, we're looking at all 6 indices into one. Some usual suspects you can imagine would be on top. The United States, China, Russia, France, UK make up the Security Council P5, essentially. But all of these indices, all of these countries, again, are based on the 6 sub-indices, so that's what you have to keep in mind. The majority representation is Europe. So Europe, at least in the top 20, overrepresents. What we also have here is that the first country in Asia is Russia, the last country in Asia is Japan. But dominantly, we have 2 or 3 countries from North America. We have India there at 11 as well, Japan and China in there for the Asia Pacific. What we don't have, as you can see, is countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we don't have countries in South America, in the top 10, at least, in the top 20 rather, at least. Now this could tell you a few things about the world. Now what happens when a country when countries grow and lose power across these 6 different areas? Because it's happening across time. Each time a government makes a new policy declaration, each time they form new trade relations, each time they break trade relations, they are impacting these 6 different areas in different ways. So across time, we're seeing many different things emerge. Geopolitical risk is rising, technological transformations are growing as well. But what causes these things to happen? Have you ever asked yourselves, what are the causes of these things? We have in our own work. So what we've done is we've identified something we call macro trend catalysts. Now this sounds quite technical, but it's easy to break down. What essentially this means are what are the main themes that cause the world to change? What are the underlying structures which cause everything that you're experiencing in your world of work to emerge? Based off of countries growing and developing in their 6 different COPs, the ranking approaches, and then we see 2 different things emerge. Number 1, what we call the Great Convergence. The Great Convergence essentially says that across time, 4 big phenomena have emerged and will continue to impact your life over at least the next 100 years. The first one being globalization. Changes, grows, and reduces. But the impact of globalization is undoubted. And it's something that will continue to grow and develop. Again, as different regions become more powerful, those parts of the world will be more active or not as active in the world of globalization. That's number 1. Number 2, geopolitical risks in parts of the world that you may not have expected them to emerge, they emerge only because now countries, as they grow in their 6 COPs, have the ability to have a much bigger voice in world affairs. We can use the example of Saudi Arabia. Back in the 20s, it was a fledgling country, not much power at all, not much of an ability to secure their own interests, shall I say. And as they grew, as they discovered oil, as oil became more important, as they formed military ties with the United States and others, they managed to use their systemically important commodities to their advantage. And over time, the other 6 have also developed. So this is why Saudi Arabia right now is considered a very much regional power because of their growth and development. The third thing that also emerges is societal change. Societal change, as you can see around you, migration flows. The concept of ESG also grows as people become much more aware of supply chains, how they're impacting the world. Different mentalities grow and develop in business, in government and also in the people. So again, this ideology of change develops, migration changes and develops, and people's attitudes towards risk also changes and develops. These are some of the major things that we're seeing emerge from the Great Convergence. Secondly, something which I think is probably a little bit more important is segmented polarity. Now, this is a much more specific way of saying a multipolar world. We've heard, and I'm sure you have across time, that we're living in a multipolar environment, where no longer the United States is the keeper of peace or Pax Americana. We have other options around the world which now are vying for the ability to do so. But in that way, we're assuming that all these countries are growing equally across time. But as we've seen from the COP, different countries at different rates are changing, growing at different speeds, which are making them more valuable in different segments. For example, Japan has no commodities to deal with. They can't excavate anything, they can't drill anything, so they're reliant on external sources of power, sources of energy. But what they do have is a very advanced technological leadership arm, and that's what they have to rely on. And that is what makes Japan a very much technological leader. Not in commodities, but in technology. As Finland grows and develops, and as other countries grow, it's not multipolarity, but it's segmented polarity, segmented on their COPs or their centers of power. This is why we see blocks emerging, like BRICS, for example, like others, which again use the untapped potential of emerging markets, and they join together to essentially become a bloc which is to be reckoned with. Segmented polarity, not multipolarity. That's something to keep in mind. But as we're looking at geopolitics, this talk is about geopolitics. Not all geopolitics are born equal, you know? Not all animals are born equal, as the book mentions. What we have essentially in the world are two specific geopolitical expressions that we see growing across the world. We have the slow and silent track, and we have the more loud and fast track. Again, not born equal. In the slow and silent track, it takes time to emerge, and it's much more strategic for countries to want to get a grasp on it. In this, I'm talking about regulations, I'm talking about standardizations, and also the internalization of currencies. For example, the Chinese renminbi, for the longest time, wanted to be a currency that wanted to be taken seriously by the world, traded and held by central banks. They're not there yet, but they definitely have a plan to be that. And when they reach this stage, eventually, what we'll see is, again, China's voice grow in international affairs because their financial strength, as measured by our financial strength index, captures that, and that's what they use to become important. Again, this is a slow process taking time. And if you're smart, you play the long game, okay? What we have on the right-hand side is sort of fast and loud geopolitical activity, I suppose you'd call it. Idea of sanctions, war, trade barriers, non-tariff barriers, something which I suppose, you know, the newspapers would take much more of an interest in because something that they can sell. Again, equally important because with sanctions comes trade barriers, whether you like it or not, a redlining of the international sort of rules-based order, and other things emerge when it's, you know, fast and loud and slow and silent. So what we're going to be looking at now is essentially two different countries, China and Russia, and how they essentially are going to be developing their economies and how they'll become much more important in world affairs. So if we're looking at China and their growth, it's like the seven rules, the sort of 7 steps of separation, where no matter what problem or advantage you have in the world, you can blame or you can ascribe it to China. The volume of their markets, etc., has really taken hold. But before we discuss that, we must understand or ask ourselves, what makes China so important? Have you asked yourselves? I'm sure you have. You've seen it in the news. You've probably discussed it in your board meetings. And it's something which captures the attention of not only telecommunications, but also of different industries. Mining sector, the diplomatic circles of how they engage. But if you were to break down China's influence in the world, I think you can break it down into 3 different segments. I think we call it process, power, and people. Process, politics, and people, rather. Let's start with process. During the times of communism, China was following the processes of a centralized economy based on demand economics, which didn't work at all well. During Mao's Great Leap Forward, we had millions and millions of people die, famine across the world, and a very unstructured and chaotic economy. That didn't serve the country well at all. So what they decided to do is, after the passing of Mao, Deng Xiaoping came into the picture, and during his tours of America and Japan, he saw a world which he didn't believe was possible. A world which is much more efficient, a world which had demand and supply side economics much more balanced, and something which he saw as the future of China. So using the processes of the West, China essentially learned from the innovations that we have created and have copied and have used them in their own innovations. So the processes they followed weren't one of their own, it was one in which they learned from the West. And they've essentially perfected it for their own economies. And then they have the politics. Again, still being a centralized economy. They call it capitalism with Chinese characteristics, as Deng Xiaoping called it. Their centralized power allowed them to make much faster decisions in the world. And when you can make faster decisions based on your own understanding, innovation grows, especially if you use learnings from the West. Again, when China became part of the WTO, late December 2021, is when they became important. So essentially, China is an adolescent in terms of its importance, 23, 24 years old, roughly. But it's the centralized power of China which has allowed them to have a process that works and a political system that says we do it and there's no question about how we do it. And they have a vision in mind as well. Although they still follow a 5-year plan, which many communist countries in the past did, they have made sure that they have one which is focused on internal growth development. It's focused also on increasing itself on the value chain so that it can be much more competitive. And when it does that, that's when it comes into conflict with the West. Because now they're providing technologies, as you all well know here, and innovations which come against the dominant powers in the world. And that's where you get the rhetoric from the United States of China's bad, they're doing this and that and the other. Okay? And then you have the people. With 1.4 billion people in the country, it's hard to ignore. That's when their consumer markets are big enough to sustain themselves, and they can use the human capital development of these people to enact their goals and enact their agenda. If China was missing even one of these three, we wouldn't be hearing about China in ways in which we do now. China would be an India in that case. Why? India, again, very similar population. In fact, it's now the most populous country in the world. Yeah? A political system of democracy, which we're not blaming democracy, but we're seeing the differences between an economy or a political system where things can be done faster and slower. Yeah? And also, India follows the processes of the West, but China, again, has these three things which allow it to be popular. That's what China has going for it currently at the moment. So, looking at China in this sense, that's what makes them popular. What do China want? As I mentioned, they want to move up the value chain. They want to avoid the middle income trap, something which Singapore and South Korea has done very well. Over the last 25 years, at least it's taken South Korea 25 years to move up to a high income economy. It's taken China 25 years to get to where they are now. So I think when discussing the middle income trap, they will be facing this, and it's a hard way out. And what we'll be talking about in China's case is not their internal dynamics. We're not talking about employment. We're not talking about internal innovation. This part of the talk will be focused on how they engage with the world. Or in other words, their global governance. That's what we're interested in talking about today. Not, again, internal politics, dynamics, and all of these things, which could be a talk onto its own. As you can imagine, we're talking about external dynamics and how they've engaged with the world. And what we've noticed in the world, or as China has been engaged, they're doing two things in the world, which I think goes unreported. Number one, what they're doing is that they're spending much more money in established Western, I say Western, I suppose you can debate that, international organizations, the UN, right? The World Trade Organization. They're spending a lot more money, putting it to work there to sway the agenda. And what they're also doing is they're placing key positions of power, Chinese workers, in these positions. And we're going to go through some examples of how they're doing this across time. And what their main aim for this is that if they can put in much more money into these organizations, and if they can place their people within these organizations, they have a much louder voice, a voice that people pay attention to more, because they're backing it up with finances and with personnel. So let's just see some examples of this. This is predominantly within the UN structure, but there will be examples outside of the UN and how they've done this. Number one, when you look at the UN Industrial Development Organization, something which China is particularly sort of keen to sway because of their own needs to develop infrastructure and to develop their manufacturing. We see the trends over 2017 and the amount of money that China has put into these organizations. China is in blue, and we can see across time, more than any other country, they've systemically put in more money. We have Japan there, Germany, and the United States, which again are the next biggest funders of this organization. Although looking at the United States, not as important given where they are economically. They've started since 2021 to put in some money, but not as much. Although across time, the United States puts in the most amount of money, more than the next 5-6 countries combined, including China, in the UN. But in these key different places, we're going to talk about how China is spending much more money. And also positions of power. You know, the Deputy Director General is Chinese. The Director General, I think, is French or American. So in this organization, they're putting in money. The next one, the ITU. I'm sure many of you know about the ITU, have engaged with them. It's very important in the telecom space. Again, across time, we can see China China's in yellow, again, putting in a lot more money across time. Much bigger jumps than any of the other countries there as well. The past Secretary General was Chinese. In the elections last year, they have a 7-year term, and it's the United States representative who will be taking that position over the next 7 years. Now, as you can imagine, having these positions of power mean, again, you can sway the conversations, you can make things more important, you can put forward proposals which are in your interests. Nothing wrong with that. That's what you want to do, and that's how you secure power, by focusing on how you can secure your own interests. And in terms of global governance, in these two organizations, at least, China is doing a lot more. Now let's turn to something which you are very, very familiar with. We're looking at sort of the Open RAN technology sphere. Again, something started by the United States to kind of cut out Huawei and to disengage sort of software and hardware. So it's much more of a freeing experience for telecoms providers. Although they're doing this within the top 5 organizations which have veto power within the All RAN Alliance, China, again, holds a very important place. They put forward the most working papers or the second most working papers in the organization. The second biggest country represented by telecoms companies is Chinese. Compare that to the Open RAN Policy Coalition, again, a very US, Western-centric organization used as a mechanism to fund research, to lobby government officials. A very Western, as we can see, Nokia's there, Meta's there, NVIDIA's there, Google, Amazon Web Services, again, very Western-focused. But I don't think the US will have much scope in closing Pandora's box now that China has grown into the beast that it is, I suppose you'd say. Let's take a look at this and then move on to the next thing. Within the ISO, if we're looking at strictly personnel, China's personnel within the subcommittees and within the committees have grown 73% over 2021 to 2020. This trend will only grow. And if they continue on this growth trajectory, they'll outpace the United States and also Japan over at least the next 5 years. Again, making their voice in these organizations much more apparent. And believe you me, there is a war happening within putting your people in these key positions of power. Because if they're there for at least the next 7 years, as we can see with ITU, you have sway, a lot of sway over the direction you're taking it. So that's China's position in established organizations. Now let's take a look at China's position in more emerging market positions. Now there's a concept that we've created that I want to share with you today, and it's called China Plus. We've heard of OPEC Plus, we've heard of all these kinds of organizations, but in our case, we're talking about China Plus, or how we like to call it, underpriced emerging market potential. Now, what this means is that although we have a China engaged in global governance in established organizations, what we also see is China engaged in emerging market, in the emerging market sphere, and creating from scratch their own organizations to vie in terms of influence with Western-based organizations. Because again, they have the scale and they have the size to do so. And they have a plan, as we mentioned, people, power, and processes. So let's just take a look at some Chinese-led organizations here. We have the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, we have BRICS, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as just 3 examples. But bear in mind, something like BRICS, for those of you who don't know, wasn't created by China. And if anyone someone put up their hand if they know who actually invented BRICS? Do you know who actually created the concept of BRICS? Yes, no? It was Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs in 2021, the chief economist, I believe, of Goldman Sachs, Sir Jim O'Neill, wrote a white paper labeling it, "We need better BRICS," talking about the growth market opportunities in Brazil, Russia, India, and China. South Africa then was included, believe it or not, because it fit the acronym of BRICS with an S. The initial country that was meant to be chosen was Nigeria, but they picked South Africa as this coalition of countries which are going to see bigger potential. So again, BRICS wasn't made by China. The others were started by China for sure. In the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Iran last year was the newest member to it, and they have their ways in which they operate to secure their interests there. These comparisons aren't exact, but we're using them as sort of examples of where their focus is in sort of clashing against, or at least coming up against, Western institutions, okay? We have the World Bank for the AIIB. You have sort of the Group of 7, or the G7 rather, for the West, you call it the West. And also we have the European Union / NATO equivalent-ish, right? It's not exact, you know? It's not like puzzle pieces being put together, but we can see how this is the case. But let's focus on BRICS for a second. I think BRICS is probably the one most important thing, which essentially describes China Plus in very obvious and quantitative ways. Now, what I mean by plus, I mean it's not BRICS, but it's China Plus, meaning without China, that organization would fall to the ground. Let's see some of the numbers. Let's look at their GDP, for example, in 2021. Would BRICS be anything without China in this example? No. See, proportion of R&D expenditure to GDP. Again, probably a little bit less evident, but without China, would it be as important when it comes to R&D and seeing how they can expand their technologies across the emerging markets? I mean, what innovations does Brazil have compared to the innovations that China has in relation to this? Or Russia, or India, or South Africa? Let's look at FX reserves also. The ability by the central bank to hold these currencies and do with them what they will across time is very important. And again, we can see in this case, China far outpacing any other country, including Russia, which has a very sizable amount of foreign currency reserves now frozen by Western institutions. That's a different story, and I think that's something that we'll come on to. But that's China's story, okay? I want to leave you showcasing in terms of global governance and China Plus, how they're engaging in the established world and in the emerging markets world across time. And they're taking their time with this. Now we're moving to something which perhaps geographically is more relevant to Finland. Our guy here, Putin, and Russia in general. Now, Russia has a different development story. Its narrative is one of historical disagreements and conflict with the West, be it the world wars, be it the Napoleonic era, and in modern times, how it's engaged with the world post-Cold War. NATO remained whilst the Warsaw Pact died, and that contention has always been something which Putin has not liked. Since the year 2000, when he became president until now, he has built, I suppose, an anti-Western point of view on things when it relates to politics, not so much business, but in politics. And he's used this narrative in his foreign policy. But if we were to compare, would you like to see a comparison of Russia and Finland according to the Global Power Index to see how they rank across the 6 different COPs? Would you like to see that? Thank you. Okay, well, let's look at Russia in the first place. Let's see how they rank across these 6 different areas. And let me explain what chart you're looking at here, okay? So at the bottom, on the x-axis, what we're looking at is the 6 sub-indices, okay? Active consumer market, military balance, et cetera, And on the y-axis, we're looking at the countries, meaning there's 194 countries in the index. So we're not looking at their scores, that's saved for 2 months' time, but we're looking at is their actual place in the index, okay? So in this case, the lower the bar, the more powerful Russia is, essentially. Opposite to what your understanding may be. So the lower the bar, the more powerful they are. So let's look at it. Again, as we can see in the case of the war in Ukraine, the military balance has been kept strong by support by the Chinese and I suppose the Iranians. This is again compared to the world, okay? They, I think, rank in that case third or fourth, I suppose. And their commodities, as we can see, naturally that would come to mind as something that is keeping them afloat and keeping, the coffers full. In other cases, their financial strength, their technological leadership is far, far behind. There's no technological leader in Russia that rivals any Western or Chinese institution. They haven't really focused their attentions there. They focus their attentions in these different areas. Okay? Now, if you were to compare this to Finland, let's see the difference. Are you ready? Power. I'll leave it there for a minute so you can see. So we can see a story emerging as to why perhaps Finland may have fears of Russia, which is why perhaps they joined NATO. And we can talk about the virtues and the negatives of that, but let's compare this for a second. Again, the shorter the bar, the more powerful you are. Let's start with the active consumer market. Given the size of the population of Russia and what we measure within that as well, we see that Russia has Finland beat 1-0. Its military balance, again, although Finland joining NATO could change the balance, but we've taken that into consideration. And despite that, again, Russia far outweighs the power of Finland, 1-1, right? So again, 2-0. Although we look at the technological leadership of a country like Finland, national leaders like Nokia and others, and their connectivity to the rest of the world and what they can offer, it's 2-1. Okay? Systemically important commodities, we can see, compared to Russia, and again, what I could have done, but I didn't, is compare them maybe to China, compared to the US to see a broader picture, but we only wanted to focus on Finland and Russia in this case. So this is what we can see. Geostrategic positioning is an interesting one because it doesn't come to mind as something that Finland has an advantage over Russia, given the size of Russia, I suppose. But in our calculations, Finland certainly has a much better geostrategic positioning than Russia does, which again, the military professionals that spoke before and others can talk about that. And also its financial strength, although we see differences slightly in what we have analyzed in terms of the ranking, right? Russia is more able to secure their interests with their finances, I suppose you could say. That's for that case. Now, if we're looking at the Ukrainian war impact on the economies, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this on the news yourselves and you've seen it within your own organizations. But we're just going to take a look at two major points that I think are worth discussing as to what damage this is causing the Russian economy, or what benefits, I suppose, they're getting from having this war. Maybe not benefits, but how they're circumventing some of the negatives which the EU wanted to inflict on Russia. So let's take a look at this. Talent flight. Over 1 million people have left Russia. A lot of IT professionals have left. This is causing a knowledge gap and a brain drain, which is very hard to get back, I suppose you'd say. And when people leave, it's very hard to convince them to come back. But there's ways in which Russia is trying to do this through a carrot and stick method. Carrots is lowering income tax and making mortgages more affordable. Mortgages for houses that they're probably not even living in, but they're still paying for. The stick is, again, they'll fire you or will increase your taxes. Something which I suppose if you're working in Bali or if you're working in Poland or if you're working many time zones away, wouldn't really matter because given your expertise, you could probably find a job, but it causes a lot of stress. And also, Western technology sanctions. We have to talk about this. Because at the beginning of the war, this is something that we thought we could hit them with and that they would be able to respond with. But given the dexterity of how they've been able to maneuver in international affairs, Russia in part, I think more so in part, has been able to circumvent a lot of these sanctions. Getting material and semiconductors, as I showed you at the beginning, through different parties. We have these countries which have worked with China, maybe because they weren't the ones who sanctioned China, and through these countries here, Turkey, UAE, China, and Georgia are just some of the countries which are willing and perhaps not so willing participants in Russia's ability to circumvent these sanctions. So this is essentially how we're looking at the world. So finally, what have we learned? We've learned, number one, that you need a process in which you look at the world, one which allows you to forecast the future of international affairs much more succinctly. I've given you this structure, and I hope you use it. And thirdly, it's important to realize that without this structure, you're looking at news stories and you're getting scared and you're getting anxious. So the importance of long-term thinking cannot be underestimated. And I hope after this talk, you're able to use what I learned, what I've shared with you today, in your own respective organizations, and hopefully also use the index in your own work as time passes. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'll take questions.
Thank you, Klisman. That was really interesting.
Thank you, Simon.
And we do have actually quite a few questions for you from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
For your questions. First of all, what do you think is the most interesting country or region to follow at the moment?
That's a very good question. That's probably the second most asked question. And if the first one isn't asked, then I'll tell you what the first one is at the end. But I guarantee we'll have the second one, the first one maybe. I think interesting could be analyzed in different ways, but a country that we're looking at closely is Turkey, or Turkey as it used to be called, for different reasons. But I think Turkey, again, with its manufacturing base and with its importance in international affairs, not being quite Western, not being quite Eastern, not being quite Northern, not being quite Southern, has played a very independent role in how it maneuvers its industry and its politics throughout the last 5 years. So I think if you're looking at development, in our point of view at least, Turkey has been an interesting one to follow. Not saying that the other 193 haven't been interesting, but for its scale and for its impact, I think that's something that we've been looking at very, very closely.
Okay. So
I should have said Finland, but I suppose Turkey is...
We keep an eye on Turkey.
Yeah.
Well, one question about Finland, of course.
Okay.
A small and advanced country like Finland, what could be the way to increase our power globally? So we were on the ranking was 19.
19, that's correct.
How do we get
Again, I had this question
upwards?
When we had this summit, because we host a summit every year where we release this data, and there was an official from the South African High Commission in London. And he said, excuse me, why are we so low? How can we become bigger? How can we do this? And the answer really is, through a political lens, what I encourage every government that we speak about to do is you need to create a national plan, a vision plan for where your country is going. Because there's no way that you'll be able to escalate on all 6 different areas in one go. It's too expensive and it's too resource heavy. And it's going to be confusing for many countries. Even the United States took a long time to develop to where it is today. So for a country like Finland, I would look at, if I was advising the government, and you're having elections soon, I know in the next couple of days and weeks, is to say, where is your vision for your country? Where do you think your strengths are? And using this index to see where are you already having natural advantages, and if you were to continue in this way, what benefits can you bring to the international community, whether it's business or political, through developing in very narrow ways? Because there's no way you can expand on all 6 sides, as I said. So I'd look at your technological leadership, I suppose. I'd look at your ability to also forecast what countries around the world are going to be emerging and how can we form relations with them now so that it pays dividends into the future. Because a lot of the time, countries stay regional because it's either safe or it's easy, they get lazy and they stay within their circle. But foreign policy and diplomacy is something which is underrated, but business diplomacy in countries and regions which there is comparative advantage to form relations with now, you do this now and it pays dividends into the future. But the problem is many people don't like to wait a long time to see the benefits. They rather do what's easy now and they face the consequences of that.
This question perhaps goes a little bit out of the topic, but I always like to ask when I meet interesting people, intelligent people like you, what do you think are the most important future skills we need?
Future skills. As a nation, as countries, this is a really interesting question.
As countries, as citizens.
Yeah. It makes sense. I think it sounds counterintuitive, but critical thinking is a skill which is not talked about as much. Because we all know technology upgrading, we all know manufacturing, we all know these things. I don't need to tell you these things, especially involved in the technology space. You know what you need. You know what students are coming to you with, and you know what you need to hire them for. Even having conversations with taxi drivers within Finland, having a conversation as to where the future of this country is going. And I think critical thinking and long-term planning for you as an individual is something which cannot be stated enough, because all the other things are well known in industry. And I can't tell you any more than what you know, especially within your own industries. But the ability to think as an individual, how can I secure my interests as an individual, as a business, and also as a country? These all form into having a critical thinking point of view, using first principles in how you develop, and again, having a long-term trajectory of your life so that you make slow and steady decisions which compound over time. That's what I'd say.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Talking about elections, there are other elections than the Finnish one in the world this year.
Yes.
24 is a year of elections all around the world. How will the elections affect the global power index? We have what? We have India, US,
you have UK,
Finland, UK, EU.
Well, it depends on what these leaders want to do with their countries, essentially. If we have the same leadership from the past, then we can expect their psychology and what their foreign policy to be quite similar. Although the world will change, the way in which they make decisions won't. But with the new leadership, you're at least able to see qualitatively what they want to achieve. But to make this even better, they need to create a vision plan. It's the incentives they have for themselves as to what they promise the electorate, if they're a democracy, and if they can deliver on these things. And for business people like yourselves, it's important to see, have they got a long-term vision? Are they able to reach it? Again, based on our research. And if they can reach it, how can we take advantage of their motivations? And if they can't reach it, how can we temper our expectations of this perhaps new government that comes into office?
Did I ask the number one question?
No.
No,
the number one
okay,
question,
tell us.
The number one question, drum roll, is how is climate change taken into consideration with the index? That's a question that everyone wants to know.
Okay.
Whether it's something which is important to you guys. Would you like a short answer to that? Is that something you care about?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, well, climate change, again, our index has the ability to measure the impacts of climate change, meaning this. It's not the fact that the climate is changing which is important. It's what effects that has on the international business demographic scene. If water levels were to continue to rise in what's the country called again? It just slipped my mind. In Bangladesh, people are moving from the coastal areas into the big cities, which means there's more density of people, which means healthcare is going to be even harder to get, lower quality. Then people move out into other parts of the world because of the impact of climate change. So it's what happens to our world as the impact of climate change, not the actual climate changing itself, but how do we respond to this? And what this index does very well is takes into consideration how these changes happen so that, again, leaders across the world can make up their minds as to what they do about it. But climate change is always the number one thing that comes about. And I suppose being a tech audience, you guys are more focused on other things, which is a good thing, I suppose.
Thank you for your presentation and for answering our questions.
My pleasure.
That was really, really interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We
Thank you so much, Telia, and thank you so much, Finland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.